And we are back. Good music, good music. This is Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson Show. We have Matt Moore on the show. He's in the studio with Dave Metheny, who is his campaign manager. Nice guys, smart guys. I always joke about getting hassled, if not necessarily if I have a Democrat in the studio, but if I even remotely, for some of my tougher buddies that give me a hard time on the very right side of the spectrum, they say, you were so nice, your questions are such softballs. But I don't think I've given you softballs. I think, and we're going to get into ANWR, and we're going to get into more of the partisanship, Matt, but I think that you've actually, either by me or by the callers, have had some good questions, and I think you're answering certainly reasonably compared to other candidates I've heard. We have Allison, who's patiently waited to ask or make a comment or ask you a question. Allison, welcome to the Tom Anderson Show. What's your comment for Mr. Moore?
Hi. Well, I want to know where he stands on the Fed. Fractional reserve banking, the gold standard, and if it should be reestablished. Whether or not drugs should be legalized so we stop handing cash over to black market sellers. And I'm also curious as to whether or not his opinion is that Congress should share the same health care plan as everybody else, independent of the Obamacare conundrum.
Okay, well, good questions. We're going to have you sign off, and then we'll have Mr. Moore answer those three. They're just building up now. Next person's going to say, I have 10 questions.
Sure, but that's fine. To get to the last question first, I'll do it in reverse, like I've got Alzheimer's or something.
Yeah,
so the last question was, no, I forgot it.
Healthcare.
Yeah,
healthcare and Obama. And what's your thought on or on Congressional?
On
they
Congressional,
have such
right?
Good
should they have the same thing, or should they have this sweetheart deal? No, it should be exactly the same as everybody else's. In fact, if you think about it, when we start offering things like welfare or anything else, it's like whatever the military gets, it should be no better than that. Whatever everyone else gets, that's what Congress should have. That's what the Senate should have, period. They shouldn't be above the law. Easy.
Then what about legalizing drugs? And last night we had Dr. Michael Reznicek. He was a psychiatrist from Washington State. Don't know if you heard the show, but he was talking about that he thinks that really there can be parity. Rehab doesn't work as much as it's personal choice and control, and if you legalize drugs like in many countries in Europe, particularly like with alcohol, it wouldn't matter. People wouldn't abuse it, and it might stop the excesses and the criminality. What's your thought in terms of
Well,
I know it's a hard answer too, isn't it?
It is, and there's no right answer. I'll start right there. First, if you think of alcohol as being a drug, that gets more abused here than anything else. So we know that when it's legal, it still gets abused. So for me, I'm kind of old school, even though I'm a Democrat, so I'm not for legalizing drugs. But at the same time, I do know that we spend a heck of a lot of money on the war on drugs, and it has made no difference. It really hasn't. The amount of drugs, the availability of drugs, when you look at the paper, you'll see somebody, they've got caught bringing in a ton of marijuana, or you'll see someone that's brought in multiple pounds of cocaine, and then they get caught. And that's just here in Anchorage and in Alaska. So the war on drugs hasn't worked. So if I was going to say, I'll be a pure businessman on this and I won't have any of my opinions in it and say, well, I'm going to do what makes the most sense fiscally, I would say we would stop the war on drugs, because we would be saving money from that perspective. But I cannot do that because I don't think all drugs should be legalized.
Now, her first question on fractional, the banking, the idea of the Fed, the Treasury, a lot of people that are not thrilled with our government, I think, also question. Some call them conspiratists. Others say they just don't like the monetary system. But that there are questions often about, how much money do we have versus what it is. Is it backed up by? It's certainly not backed up by gold. And I think, didn't Congress just pass? I was listening to the news today. I don't think it has to do with the monetary policy report, but it had to do with the Federal Reserve and report to Congress on and an audit. Dave's saying, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there should be an audit? Again, I don't think you alone can solve this, and I know that there's layers of this, but I don't want to deflate your answer.
No, don't worry. It's going to be a real small answer this time. For the Federal Reserve, I'm not as keen on that as I should be. I do know that the Federal Reserve was formed, and it was formed separate from government because we didn't want to have individuals that would be able to manipulate it. And that's about all I know on it right now.
I had someone write in and they said our government should not have money based on debt, and that's a big.
Right.
I think you'll be quickly educated. And another person just wrote, Mr. Young doesn't know any more than he does on the federal banking system. That's obviously a slight against him, but I mean, and I don't know if that person knows. But let's get into your platform and why you are running. I would assume there are some areas that you have more passion than not for. Right. And if anybody listening, anybody on earth ran, they would have areas of interest. We all have idiosyncrasies and areas that maybe you want to change, improve, delete.
Right. Well, I think for me, knowing that this is a resource-based state and knowing that for the short period of time that we have in the future where we can take advantage and develop these resources, we really need to make hay while the sun's shining. And so for me, that's one of the things I want to make sure that we do. I want to make sure that we explore other markets and be able to bring stability really to this state. And during that period of time, as I was saying before, we do need to be able to diversify so we can have, just like, let's say you're going to invest. You're not going to put all your money into one stock. You're going to look at stocks. You're going to look at bonds. You're going to look at properties. And you're going to divest. So you can just have that opportunity. So when the time comes, if one of them goes down and is not doing so well, then the other ones will actually buoy it up. And for us, we're really dependent on one thing, and that's customers. If somebody that's over in the Pacific says, well, we aren't going to eat fish this year, we've got a problem. For our herring roe, for our salmon roe, and for pretty much all of our salmon fisheries, that's going to be a disaster. And so we need to be able to have some sort of safeguards that are in place, and that's one of the things we can do. We've still, we've talked about gas lines in the state. We've talked about it for 50 years. We haven't done anything yet, and that's based primarily because of the volatility of the value of gas. No one can say this is really what it's going to be for an extended period of time, and I can make contracts based on that. And these are the people I'm going to do business with, because there's just not that much of a push, not enough momentum to get it to work.
Do you think a Democrat can be a fiscal conservative? And if so, are you one?
Yeah.
Do you think that the labeling that a Democrat is pro-government and the government is the brother and sister's keeper versus the Republican who says it's accountability and entrepreneurialism and capitalism, do you think those are unfair labels?
I do. I think it's actually a blend of both. And, when you talk about people try to further delineate their party that they're in. They'll say, I'm a moderate this, or I'm a moderate that, or I'm far to this side or far to the other side. One of the things that I like and hate, love-hate relationship here, about the Democratic Party is we let everybody in. There's no litmus test. And what that does is that gives us a great diversity of ideas. We have an opportunity to have open and frank discussions most of the time, and we can come up with some pretty good solutions. Absolutely. Instead of having two or three people to get together and say, this is the way we're going to do it for everybody, one size fits all, and you're going to love it.
See, Matt, not categorizing is my cup of tea, and someone who doesn't use partisan labels is my cup of tea. And I know you're running as a Democrat, and I think you're probably pragmatic that if you ran as a nonpartisan, there's rule structures in the primary and in voting, and you almost have to, and if people are shaking their heads, so be it. You almost have to pick a party, Republican or Democrat or whatever. In Minnesota, the Democratic Farmer Party. There's so many different parties in the states, different than here. But you have to pick one, or you really won't be viable, especially when you move into the general election.
Oh, absolutely. And I will tell you, the short period of time that I spent working overseas, I got to see in certain countries that have 7 or 8 parties that were all equally as strong, and the diverse opinions that they had were tremendous. And compared to what we have in the Democratic and Republican parties,
they're very close.
They're extremely close, except for maybe 3 or 4 issues, tops.
Absolutely.
And so I look at them, and they, when they stand on either side of the aisle and they scream at each other, it's like, you guys are the same.
Yeah, no, exactly.
We're all Alaskans here.
Well, we're running into a break. I'm a fan of Mark Begich, and I'm a fan of Lisa Murkowski, and I'm proud of both of them. And I'm not going to apologize. I tend to apologize too much on the show to say sorry to my Republican brothers and sisters to even remotely compliment Mark Begich, but I will here and now, and I think he's doing a great job. That said, we have a break. We have one more segment. We have Matt Moore. Folks, if you have questions, keep writing in or call in 522-1020. We're going to talk ANWR. We're going to talk development. We're going to talk icebreakers and deep water ports and see what Matt's opinion is when we come back on the Tom